From Chicago's CAN TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs, and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
And hello again. Welcome to another edition of Chicago Newsroom. I'm Ken Davis here on CAN TV. It's been a busy week, as it often is in Chicago. We have a new temporary police chief. We have a mayor in waiting who, when he's not visiting radio studios to congratulate people who are emulating him on Twitter, is busy injecting himself into all kinds of ward runoff races, and there are 14 of those. So we got a number of those things to talk about today, and we're going to focus on education for the very simple reason that we have with us today Sarah Karp, who is with us from Catalyst magazine, and also Lorraine Forte, and we'll be talking with them extensively about where we're going to go in Chicago over the next couple of years as Rahm Emanuel becomes our mayor. Also, Hunter Klaus joining us today, now with the Chicago News Cooperative. Hunter, nice to have you back on the show again. And I know you've been writing a lot about all of these things, including education. But let's just start off with the rather dramatic departure yesterday. We can't call it a resignation because, as he pointed out, Jody Weiss's contract simply ended, and he opted not to extend it. So he didn't quit. He just, as he said, fulfilled his contract. And then, stunningly, out of nowhere, all of a sudden, Terry Hillard is walking in the front door of the police department. I mean, you know, just the first thing I had was, why were we not informed? How did this come about? But put this into some perspective for us. There was a lot of discussion in the news media yesterday about, you know, did he quit or was he pushed? And I find myself being completely, utterly uninterested in that question. Did Jody Weiss leave because of a philosophical difference that he knew was irreconcilable with the incoming administration?
Who knows? I mean, those are conversations that probably took place between Mr. Weiss and Mr. Emanuel, or Mayor-elect Emanuel. But you know, as we talked before, it is interesting that one of the things that Weiss has said was that he was a big proponent of police reallocation, which is taking cops from one district and putting them into high crime areas with other districts. A big proponent of that plan in the City Council, 9th Ward Alderman Anthony Beal, which covers like the far south side Pullman area, he was also a big proponent of this plan. He was the chairman of the Police and Fire Committee, and he was quietly taken off of that committee, I believe either last month or the month before. So I mean, there does seem to be a pattern of, you know, people who were in favor of this plan quietly going into the night. What's interesting about it is that at least we're led to believe that this discredited plan was actually the mayor's plan, and I think to a lot of people not an unreasonable plan. It's like if you have this many resources, and that amount of resources is diminishing every day, and you have a city that has disproportionate areas where crime is higher, well, then let's start reallocating those resources. Let's put them where they're needed. And as I understood it, that's what the mayor told his new guy to do, and his new guy started doing it, and just, of course, as we could predict, just ran into the political buzzsaw, and then he had to be ejected. I mean, is that unfair? Well, I mean, the other thing you have to keep in mind, too, is to some extent this is already going on. In the 41st Ward, which is one of the wards that is going into a runoff, a big campaign issue up there was police reallocation.
Stop
a lot of
police reallocation.
Yeah, specifically to stop police reallocation. It's down to Marita Gavin, who is the administrative assistant to retiring Alderman Brian Doherty, the lone Republican, and Democratic Committee woman Mary O'Connor. There are a lot of cops that live up in that ward, and a big issue during all the forums leading up to the general election was this issue of police reallocation. They just didn't want it. They saw it as, you know, we're paying our tax dollars. We want this stuff to stay in our ward. Now, you know, I'm sure people can disagree with that, but
well, I mean, I think the one thing we can probably all agree on is that it is an emotional issue. It's a hit you in the heart kind of issue. If you live in a ward that is relatively low crime, and you feel like you have good police protection, the last thing in the world you want to do is give it up, even if it's because somebody's making a logical argument that it's needed elsewhere. So it's almost one of those insoluble things. But it's very interesting to me that Terry Hillard, who in his time as police superintendent rarely spoke ill of anyone, was really pretty sharp yesterday. He was saying, you know, this guy had it all wrong. He was attacking the patrol division, and we're not going to do that. So he's coming in, you know, pretty strongly, like he wants to sort of put it the way it was, bring it back to the way it was.
It's kind of interesting too, because when he was around, there was, you know, a lot of claims of police brutality. There was a higher violent crime rate. So I think there's sort of a tension between police reallocation and just safety issues and crime rates. And I think that, you know, if you really want to lower crimes, there's a bunch of experts on WBZ talking about this issue, saying that if you really want to lower crime rates, what you do is you do police reallocation, unless you can just increase the number of cops, which, you know, I know Rahm said that he's going to do it, but, you know, we don't know where he's going to get the money to do it, so that's we have to wait and see. But everyone wants lower crime, but people don't want to make the hard decisions. And you know, you look, we vote. People say they voted for Rahm because he had some balls, right? But we don't know if he does. Then he needs to stand up on this issue and say, you know, we need police where there's crime.
Where they're needed. Yeah. Well, I mean, and what you're saying mirrors virtually every discussion that we seem to be having in this country today about the disparity between what people say they want, less government, less everything, and what they actually want, which is, you know, as I said before, have streets and sanitation come and sweep my front porch off. That's what they really want.
Yeah, and who's really saying, well, we want less government? I mean, they may say that, but it's just like a catchphrase that people say, and they really don't, because government is police, government is, you know, your people coming to pick up your trash, it's people plowing the alleys when there's a huge blizzard, and you know, that's what government is. I mean,
and teachers. I think they fit in there somewhere too.
They fit in there somewhere too.
I want to get
the teachers.
I want to get to them, but I also just Hunter, you've written about this pretty extensively over the last couple of weeks, and it's something that I find really fascinating. And I do want to mention that next week we have Cindy Canary from the Illinois campaign, and we're going to devote a lot of the show next week to talking about where the money is in the 14 races in Chicago right now, because there is a lot of it. I mean, you can buy a very high quality alderman these days because their prices are high, higher than they've ever been. There's an organization called For a Better Chicago. We've talked about it for weeks on the program. I noticed the Tribune today is talking about it on their front cover today too. Where is Rahm Emanuel and where are his allies going to put their money in these 14 ward races? From what I can tell, with the sole exception of Bernie Stone, if you're an incumbent, Rahm is going to stand with you. Am I right about that?
Don't know for sure just yet. I talked to Alderman Stone, and he said that he had reached out to the mayor-elect, asking him specifically to stay out of his ward race. Emanuel had supported a couple of candidates in, was it last Tuesday's election? It feels like forever ago now.
Last Tuesday, no, it does seem like it was a month ago, yeah.
One of them being Deborah Silverstein, who's running against Alderman Stone. He also supported Tom O'Donnell, who is Alderman Eugene Schulter's handpicked successor in the 47th Ward. Biggest upset of the night. O'Donnell lost to a young man named Amaya Pawar, 30 years old, was working on getting his third master's degree, but he said that he's going to hold off on that for a while.
As the critics are saying, he's only a renter. He doesn't even own property in the ward.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that wasn't a big issue for the voters there. Right. But, you know, Emanuel has gotten involved with a couple of the races already. I'm told that you know, Alderman John Rice, who is in a runoff in the 36th Ward, he has told me and my colleague Dan Miopoulos that Mr. Emanuel is going to be supporting him in the runoff. For Drina Lyle in the 6th Ward, she's up against Roderick Sawyer, the son of former Mayor Eugene Sawyer. She has said that Mr. Emanuel has said that he would give her some support in the runoff.
But I understand Sawyer himself is saying that he thinks he might be able to get some money too, right?
Sawyer has. Sawyer also said that he believed that he would be getting some money from former Senator Roland Burris too, but that didn't happen. But we'll see. You know, I think the Emanuel camp is doing their own homework on some of these races to see who's actually a viable candidate.
But the bottom line here is that Rahm Emanuel is coming in with some money. He's got a couple of million. Do we even know how much money For a Better Chicago has to slosh around?
I mean, at one point we did know that they had somewhere upwards of $800,000, I believe. $700,000, $800,000. We don't know exactly where that money has come from.
That's the issue, right?
Right. As I first reported for Chicago News Cooperative some time ago, this is a political action committee run by Greg Goldner, who was the campaign manager for Mr. Emanuel's first run at Congress in 2002. And he also worked on one of Mayor Daley's,
the mayor's campaign.
I believe 2003 it was. So there are connections to both the mayor and Emanuel with this group.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's going to be very interesting to watch that because, you know, in an aldermanic race where this thing could be decided by, there could be 3,000 or 4,000 votes in some of these wards. It doesn't take very much to persuade 1,000 people to come out. So it could be a lot of money can have a big result, I guess.
Oh, definitely. I mean, you're right. You're absolutely right. There's a very low turnout. Without the pizzazz of a mayoral election, of course, I would be surprised if you have a high turnout in some of these wards. Yeah.
Well, we mentioned Terry Hillard, and the idea that of the two. I mean, I won't say they're the most important, but probably the buckets of people that get cared about the most, those who provide us with our children's education and those who provide us with our safety. They both have temporary heads at the moment. Terry Mazzani, of course, at the schools. But it's a different story with Terry Mazzani. I mean, it's very different than Terry Hillard, who is coming in saying, absolutely not, I'm just here for a couple of weeks, I'm leaving.
Yeah, Terry Mazzani a couple of times has given the impression that he would stay if asked, and his background is in education. I mean, he's been a top deputy in California, and he's been a school administrator in Michigan. He came to the trust to kind of formulate their education agenda, and, you know, is very active, you know, on that. So I wouldn't be surprised if asked if he did stay, and he does. I mean, people have been wanting an educator for years, and you know.
But here's the thing, though, and this is what I just have been waiting all week to sit here with you guys and ask you about this, because just tell me that I'm completely wrong about this, but my perception when he took over from Ron Huberman was that he very quickly signaled, we're not going to be doing things the same way.
No, you're right. When you hear him talk, and I've heard him speak a couple of times, he's, you know, criticizes the emphasis on test scores under No Child Left Behind. He talks about education in a more, for lack of a better word, holistic way, and says, you know, we need art, we need music, which most schools, unless they pay for it themselves, haven't had for years. So he talks about, I mean, he even talked about education as like, you know, a democratic society. We need, you know, it's not just about test scores.
But here's the thing that I don't understand. Isn't he, at least in some ways, philosophically at odds with the race to the top and with our esteemed former schools chief who now runs the Department of Education, Arnie Duncan? I mean, but Rahm Emanuel's the mayor, and Obama, and they all played basketball together. How can you be at odds with that?
I think that also the thing that says to me that maybe Mazzani won't stay. Now, I kind of tend to think, like Lorraine, that he's going to stay. I mean, from what I hear, things are going on inside CPS that would not go on for someone who's going to be there for 3 months. I mean, people are getting jobs, people are changing jobs. You're not going to, who's going to take a job if you know that, if you don't have a guarantee that you're going to have it for some time, right?
So he's not just warming the seats.
He's not just warming the seats. But on the other hand, if you look at Charles Payne, who's his chief education officer, he is not the type of, charter school, person that Emmanuel seems to be. He's much more, community-oriented, grassroots-oriented.
He's from U of C,
And he takes a very comprehensive approach to how a school should look and the connection with the community. And I don't get that that's Emmanuel's thing. So it's not like they're diametrically opposed, but I just don't see Charles Payne, who I think would be a very sort of good chief education officer with some ideas that are very supported by the education world. But I don't see that Emmanuel's really on board with that.
Well,
this is like having a water cooler conversation over at the Catalyst office, I imagine.
Well, and Emmanuel said the other day something about charters. Well, if they're not a silver bullet, and if they're good, they're good. If they're not, they should be closed just like anything else. So he came from an administration that was raced to the top, and we want charters, but he seems to me be a little softer on and not kind of going with the, we need more charters, we need, not gung-ho with that.
Where would you say he is with respect to Mayor Daley? Is he less
my impression so far is like a less Ren 10. None. He has said, I think that
one of his biggest supporters was Juan Rangel.
Yeah, and that's
Juan Rangel being the head of the United Neighborhood Organization, which operates one of the largest charter school networks in the city.
And then the city, the school system doesn't have money to open a bunch of charters anyway. So, I'm not saying that he's not in favor or wouldn't open them, but to go gung-ho and say we're going to open 100 more in another 6 years, there's no money for that. I mean, it's just not going to, it doesn't add up.
And I think when he said that about charter schools, that they're not the silver bullet, that's just the writing on the wall. I mean, there's no way that you cannot say that. He said that, I think, in response to the fact that he went to a charter school and was talking it up, this Chicago International Charter School. And then somebody might have pointed out to him that that charter school is one of the highest dropout rates in the city, and I mean among the charter schools. So then I think he had to reconsider how wonderful this place is statements. So
well, Sarah, you and Catalyst, and I know you've worked with WBEZ on these stories, but you've done some really interesting looks at charter schools and what their progress is, and it's very complicated, and there's a million moving parts. So when you just look at one piece, you're not looking at everything else. But is it fair to say that so far charter schools haven't been the silver bullet?
They haven't been the silver bullet. I mean, I think that WBEZ just did a data analysis that showed like 58% of them were outperforming their comparable neighborhood schools. So I guess it depends where you look. From one hand, you could say, well, 58% of them are, outperforming their comparative neighborhood schools.
By how much? And that doesn't take a lot to do in a lot of communities.
But it was by fair amounts in a lot of cases. I mean, 70%, 40%. I mean, you have to really look at the details. But on the other hand, you could say, well, if in a lot of cases you're half as likely to be in a good charter school as you are to, your chances are just as good to be in a good charter school, be in a good neighborhood school. Why not just go with the neighborhood school? I mean, there's a financial problem too with charter schools, that initially there's a lot of private investment. That private investment has dried up for a lot of them over time.
Isn't that always the way it is?
You wrote for the Chicago News Cooperative about how a lot of these charter schools have deficits. And when you've got a district that's looking at a very hefty deficit, that just trickles down.
Right, and then you have UNO. I mean, UNO has a big grant from the state to build new charter schools, but its internal operations, the teachers, how it pays teachers, they are running like a $5 million deficit, at least as far as the 4 quarters of last fiscal year. So
could you guys give me a little bit of Education 101 here, just for the viewers who, like me, get very confused about this? What the heck is a charter school, and how are they funded, and are they public schools? I mean, I know this is getting really weird to
Yeah,
understand.
I mean, they are public schools in the sense that you're not allowed to test kids to get into them. I mean, there's a certain self-selection because you have to apply, but they are public schools. They receive a certain amount of money per pupil from the district, you know, to operate. But teachers can't belong to the Chicago Teachers Union, although some charters have formed their own, you know, teachers union. And they're allowed, you know, they can have most of them have a much longer school day and do other things that the traditional public schools don't. But I just want to quickly mention, and we can go back to what you said, that Terry Mazzani said something at an event last week where he said, whenever someone comes up with something as a single answer to education, I know it's going to be wrong, because it isn't, you know, you don't just say, okay, this is a charter school.
We're going to
so
impose a new curriculum, and it's
or we're
going
to pay, you know, merit pay for teachers, you know, and that's going to solve it. So.
I raised that question about charters because I know that there are just a lot of confusing things out there. But one of the things that you guys have written about is that if charters can't exactly throw out the kids that they don't like, they have a number of very creative ways of getting rid of them and sending them back to the already struggling neighborhood school. So when I'm old enough to remember when the first wave of school reform discussion was being talked about, and one of the words that always was used back then was creaming, that you're going to take the best kids and isolate them in certain schools, and while that might be good for them, it's doubly bad for the schools that they left behind. And are we seeing that?
Yeah, I think so. What I sort of look at it is that now we have the selective enrollment schools, then we have the magnet schools, then we have charter schools, then we have neighborhood schools. It's almost by default the neighborhood schools are becoming like the alternative schools of the school system. Charter schools are really good for the kids who don't have the grades or the scores to get into the selective enrollment schools, who didn't win the lottery to get to the magnet schools. Well, here's another option. And if you're going to take advantage of that option, you have to, for the most part, be super disciplined. Not super smart, super disciplined. And so if you want a place for your child that is very structured, pretty safe, clean, maybe new technology, a lot of charter schools are good. I mean, I'm a parent. I would consider certain charter schools for my kids. Now, I think that you have to be really educated as a parent these days because you have to know where are the good charter schools. You have to know where are the good magnet schools. You have to know where are the good selective enrollment schools. You have to know some neighborhood schools, and especially on the north side, are decent neighborhood schools and worth sending your child to. So you really just have to be educated. You know, it's like, and actually I don't really want to be as educated as I think as a parent has to be, but you have to be. You have to know like the inside.
And you're an education reporter.
Right, and it's not fair to make, you know, to get to go out and, you know, when we did our last issue, our issue on Renaissance 10 and charter schools, I interviewed a parent who, you know, takes her kid all the way to a magnet school on the north side, and she said, well, when my car is working, I drive, but, you know, when I'm not, she's got to catch 2 buses, and, you know, it takes her like 2 hours to get her kid to school. I mean, that's just not,
well,
that's not
this
fair.
is something that you guys have written about extensively and very well, and telling those stories of people who have to take 2 buses, or kids have to take 2 buses in an L to get to, just hopefully to get to a school better than the one that they were at. It's really heartbreaking. Another thing that happens, though, is that a lot of the older neighborhood elementary schools apparently are just getting emptied out. I mean, this is something that I did not even contemplate until I read what the 126 worst elementary schools in the city have each lost on average 1/3 of their students since 2000. You talk about a school that has like 123 kids left in it or something.
Yeah, there's so many schools that are really sort of dying on the vine, and I think that that's the story that's really the thing that Manuel's going to have to deal with. If he really wants to keep opening schools, even if he wants to stay status quo with the 100 schools that we've just opened, he needs to figure out how to close schools and not have community revolts. Because
Our
even
population's going down.
Right, population's going down, the school system's population's going down. I think now we're at 405,000. I think just a couple years ago we were like at 412,000.
Wow,
So
really?
we've lost children. So, you know, all these factors, you gotta close schools. If you're gonna be, if you're gonna make, you know, good financial decisions, you're gonna have to really close school buildings. Now the charters are saying close them and give them to us. Actually, some charter schools want the building. Some want CPS to keep the building, do the maintenance for the building, but let them rent it. But there's going to have to be some really hard decisions. And that's probably the bigger decision, bigger than charters, bigger than anything, is closing schools. Because as much as one little school might seem like it's dying, might have very poor test scores, there's a lot of people in the community. Their children went there. Their grandchildren.
Oh,
went there.
absolutely.
I mean, there's a community connection to that chart.
And as you've pointed out, there are communities in Chicago, sad to say, where these are sort of like the last, you know, the last bastion of some kind of organization in a receding sort of community, and it's a terrible thing. Hunter, put this into political perspective for us. You got a new mayor coming in. What has he got to do right away?
Well, he has to figure out who he's going to put in place. I mean, clearly, Mr. Emanuel has said that he is looking around for someone to put in the CEO spot, although he is not against keeping Mazzani around. But you know, a lot of these big decisions that Sarah and Lorraine just talked about are going to have to be made sooner rather than later. The district's heading into you know, an estimated $720 million deficit. I believe 30 days after the new mayor and the city council is sworn in, the Chicago Board of Education has to vote on whether or not it can give the teachers union its contractual wage increases. If they cannot do that,
huh?
yeah, if the board decides that they cannot afford that, then that opens up the door for the teachers to pursue a strike.
That opens up Little Madison. We didn't even get a chance to talk about Madison here today, and I really wanted to try to put that in some perspective here too. Charter schools had to replace an average of more than half of their teachers between 2008 and 2010. Can you quickly address that?
Well, Sarah could address it better than me, but I'll just say younger teachers, they don't stay. Most people who go into teaching, or half of people who go into teaching these days, leave in a couple of years anyway. But Sarah could speak to that better than me.
How can you not put all of this other stuff into the mix and say if you're going to be a teacher today, there's not much hope that you're going to want to be a teacher for 30 or 40 years because look what they're going to do to you.
Right. That's the case. I mean, a lot of teachers leave just because of, you know, they're young, they start families, they move, but there is something going on in a lot of the charter schools about the conditions of those charter schools. Talk about UNO. UNO has one of the highest turnover rates. Now, from what I hear, that they impose a curriculum on their teachers, so they take sort of a model of, it doesn't matter who it is standing in front of the class, we're going to tell them what should be coming out of their mouth. Right? So a lot of teachers, if you get tired of it or don't want to stick with it and maybe leave. And I think a lot of charter schools, they have, you know, it's sort of like they have the structure, and the people part is a very difficult thing. And you notice a lot of charter schools, they have good environments, but but their test scores are, you know, not so high. So maybe
Sarah, you know, I'm really sorry to do this to you. We just flat out ran out of time, and this conversation is just ongoing, and we will continue to have it going. I want to thank Sarah Karp. I want to thank Hunter Klaus. I want to thank Lorraine Forte for being with us today. And I recommend picking up Catalyst. And by the way, congratulations, you guys won a nice big award, and that's very good. Thanks. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom right here on CAN TV. Of course, you can find us here on cable, but you can also see this and other programs at cantv.blip.tv. Check us out there. You can subscribe in iTunes, all those good things. And thank you so much for watching us. We'll be back again next week with another show. Thanks for watching here on CAN TV.